claim that people make is, well, actually that's not the case, because, the Bible has been changed so many times, and there are so many things that, were added to the Bible later on, because it's dated so late, it's really not falsifiable, because, Constantine and these overzealous monks and all this sort of stuff, that's where the Bible came from. You ever heard you heard it, right? You're familiar, Dan Brown and Da Vinci Code and all this other kind of stuff, right? Yeah, Constantine, man, he made up the Bible. This stuff was added late. All this stuff about Jesus and resurrection and so on and so forth, that stuff was added late, man. That stuff wasn't in there early. And so you have people like the Jesus Seminar, and these people who will say, well, there's actually the Christ of history, and then there's the Christ of faith. The Christ of history, he really did exist, because we can't deny that, right? But all of this other stuff that they say about him, that's the stuff that was added later. And what you have is these overzealous monks who went, and they're the people who changed the Bible. And you have Constantine, who wanted the Bible with these sorts of things in it, and he, all these other books, we're going to get rid of, and da-da-da-da, and so on and so forth. And besides that, you really can't believe any of this stuff because of how many times it's been translated. We don't even know what's there anymore. There are professors who stand up and say this stuff in college classrooms. Let's deal with the first one, Let's deal with this issue of, translated so many times. There are people who, in their college classroom, these are supposed to be where intellectuals are, right? In their college classroom have professors who refer to the Bible and its many translations to a game of telephone. You know how you play telephone, right? I come and I whisper something into your ear, and then you whisper it into his ear, you whisper it into her ear, you whisper it into his ear, all the way down the line till you whisper it into his ear, and then you stand up and you say what you heard. And it ain't nothing like what I said over here. This is the argument that people make against the reliability of the Bible. All of these multiple translations that it's gone through, we don't even know what was there. People who make this claim are ignorant or evil or both. Here's why. Because the Bible is not translated from translations. So I'm reading here from the ESV. The ESV didn't go to earlier translations, New American Standard or, something like that, and translate those that were translations of earlier translations, NIV, and maybe that was a translation of something earlier, and that was a translation of the New King James. The New King James was a translation of the King James, and King James was a translation of the Geneva Bible, and so on and so forth. That's not how it works. You see, the people who translated the ESV and even later translations, they didn't go back to earlier translations. They went back to Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic manuscripts. Which means that this is how the game goes. I whisper something into your ear. I don't tell you to whisper it into his. I whisper the same thing into his ear. And then I whisper the same thing into her ear. On down the line till I whisper it into your ear. And everybody hears it from the same source. That's how the Bible's translated. And if you will learn Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic, you can go to the same manuscripts yourself and verify the translations. That's why this is a wicked, wicked lie. It's terrible. And college professors get away with it all the time. And young Christians have no idea how to respond. Well, yeah, there are a lot of translations out there, and I have played that game of telephone before, and I guess you got accepted on blind faith. It's a wicked, wicked lie. That's not how the Bible is translated. Well, but those manuscripts, you do have, Constantine and his overzealous monks, and we want these and not those, and you destroy that and you keep that, and da-da-da-da, right? Small problem. It's actually a multi-layered problem. At least 3 layers of problems for the overzealous monk. Layer of problem number 1. Let's just talk about the Greek manuscripts. There are over 6,000 manuscripts or portions of manuscripts of the Greek Bible. So there's problem number 1. Over 6,000 manuscripts or portions of manuscripts. So our overzealous monks, who change all this stuff and, constantly I want this and not that, these overzealous monks, what they'd have to do is they would have to change 6,000 manuscripts or portions of manuscripts. Tell the same lie. Don't show your ink work. Don't get caught. Well, there's a second layer of problems. The second layer of problems is, Jesus said to go and make disciples of pantata ethne. That ethne, ethnos, that sound familiar? Ethnic. Go and make disciples of all nations, all ethnicities. The problem with ethnicities, they're separated by languages, which means that within the first couple of 100 years, these Greek manuscripts of the New Testament had to be translated into Syriac, Coptic, and Latin. Well, if you're going to change these thousands of Greek manuscripts, and there are translations already in Syriac, Coptic, and Latin, guess what you're also going to have to do? You're going to have to learn how to lie as well in Syriac, Coptic, and Latin as you lie in Greek. Find the translations, change those to make sure that they match the lies that you told in the Greek manuscripts. There's a third layer of problems. That third layer of problems is the early church fathers. Now, the early church fathers had this terrible habit of writing commentary on the New Testament. Writing extensive commentary on the New Testament. So much so that if all we had were the commentaries of the early church fathers, we could reproduce all of the New Testament, save 11 verses. So now your overzealous monk has to find 6,000 Greek manuscripts and portions of manuscripts, change them all, don't show your ink work, don't get caught. You got to find all of the Syriac, Coptic, and Latin translations of those manuscripts that you changed, and you got to change those so that nobody can tell that they were telling something different than what you have in the line about Greek versions, so they got to match. And then you got to go find the writings of the early church fathers and make sure that the writings in those things match what you did in the Syriac, Coptic, and Latin translations and all the Greek manuscripts. And you got to live about 400 years in order to accomplish this. And you've got to have the first successful conspiracy of more than one person ever. Because conspiracies die with more than one person. They don't work. You can't get there from here, folks. You can't get there from here. Yeah, well, but we don't have any of the originals. You left that out, Mr. Smarty Pants. We don't have any of the originals. No, we actually don't. None of the originals have survived. Mainly because of the kind of papyrus that they were written on. Those types of things that they were written on early on did not survive, which is why there had to be thousands upon thousands upon thousands. And so, we don't have the originals. But we can put our hands on copies, portions of manuscripts that are dated as early as AD 120. Why is that significant? Well, the Bible's done being written around AD 90. We can right now today go and put our hands on things. Well, actually, you can't put your hands on them. They're behind glass. Touch them, and then we won't even have those. But you can go museums right now today, right, and look at manuscripts that date as early as AD 120. That's within 3 decades of the writing of the originals. You're not satisfied with that? Oh, that's interesting. Because people are satisfied with much less. Like, for example, nobody questions the authenticity of Aristotle's Poetics. right? But the earliest manuscript that we can put our hands on of Aristotle's Poetics was written 1,400 years after the originals, and nobody questions their authenticity. Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars, again, the earliest copies that we can put our hands on, written 1,000 years after the originals. That's how we know about Julius Caesar, right? And nobody questions them. Nobody questions them. The English department is not sitting there having to defend their belief in Aristotle or Julius Caesar because of the late dating of the manuscripts that they have. Homer's Iliad. Now, we have more manuscripts of that than others. We still have less than 1,000. But the earliest one that we can put our hands on was written 2,100 years after the original. And nobody questions the authenticity of it. The Bible, the New Testament, over 6,000 manuscripts and portions of manuscripts. And we can put our hands on ones that were written within 30 years of the original. Folks, if it was a fight, they'd stop it. No other department in the university does textual criticism like the Bible department. Nobody does. In fact, they think it's ludicrous. If you expected the kind of literary criticism, the kind of criticism of the manuscripts that you get from New Testament scholars for English scholars or Latin scholars or ancient literature scholars, they would laugh you out of the university. Because not only is it not expected, it's not even possible. And yet, that's what God has provided with the Bible. Nothing can come close. We have a reliable collection of historical documents written by eyewitnesses during the lifetime of other eyewitnesses.